The rhythmic thud-thud thud reverberated through the very foundations of the suburban house, a deep, resonant pulse that shook the dust from forgotten corners and rattled the framed photographs on the mantelpiece. It was the sound of iron meeting rubber, of raw power unleashed, followed by the sharp, metallic clang as the barbell kissed the floor, then the guttural grunt of exertion, a primal cry of effort. Inside the converted garage, sweat plastered strands of dark hair to Alex's forehead, tracing rivulets down a flushed face and muscled neck. Every fiber of their being was focused, every breath a controlled explosion, as they drove the weight overhead, a fleeting moment of triumph before gravity reclaimed its due. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and determination, the only music the symphony of strain and success. Just as Alex dropped the weight for the final rep of the set, the deafening clang echoing through the quiet afternoon, a crisp, white envelope slid with an almost theatrical silence under the garage door. The stark contrast was jarring, a rude awakening from the trance of athletic pursuit. Alex, still panting, wiped a forearm across their brow, the sound of their own ragged breathing suddenly loud in the abrupt quiet. They picked up the envelope. The HOA logo, stark and unyielding, seemed to mock the intense effort that had just transpired. Excessive noise, the bold print declared. They called it excessive noise. They had no idea it was the sound of a dream, shattering or soaring. Alex wasn't just some casual fitness enthusiast. For years, their life had been a meticulously crafted tapestry of dedication, woven with threads of sacrifice and an unyielding vision. The Olympics, not just any sport, but Olympic weightlifting, a brutal, beautiful discipline demanding explosive power, precision, and an almost insane level of commitment. Every lift, every drop, every grunt was a calculated step towards a singular goal. Their home, nestled in a quiet, tree-lined cul-de-sac, was more than just a residence. It was a fortress of solitude, a clandestine training ground. The garage, once destined for mundane lawnmowers and forgotten boxes, had been transformed. Heavy-duty rubber mats covered the floor, thick and dense, designed to absorb impact but never truly silence the thunderous drops of hundreds of pounds of steel. A custom-built squat rack dominated one wall, barbells gleamed on the floor, and a lone fan hummed tirelessly, battling the stifling heat that built up even on the coolest days. It wasn't glamorous, not like the state-of-the-art facilities Olympians usually trained in, but it was Alex's, and it was here that the true work happened, away from prying eyes and the judgment of others. The secrecy wasn't born of shame, but of a quiet, almost superstitious belief that the dream, still fragile, needed to be nurtured in private, away from the inevitable skepticism of a world that often misunderstood true ambition. The first whispers of discontent had begun weeks ago, subtle at first. A passive-aggressive note slipped into the mailbox about unusual vibrations, a neighbor's pointed stare across the lawn. Alex had dismissed them, attributing them to the usual suburban busybodies. They had tried to be considerate, training only during reasonable hours, avoiding early mornings or late nights. But Olympic weightlifting wasn't a quiet sport. There was no way to lift and drop 300 pounds silently. The nature of the lifts, the snatch, the clean and jerk, demanded that the weight be dropped after completion, a necessary safety measure to prevent injury and allow for maximum effort. Each drop was a testament to the effort, a punctuation mark in the relentless pursuit of strength. Alex had invested in the best sound-dampening equipment available for a home gym, but short of building a bunker, there was no escaping the inherent acoustics of the sport. Then came the first official HOA notice. It wasn't a fine, just a formal warning, a polite but firm reminder of the community's quiet enjoyment clauses. It cited repeated instances of excessive percussive noise and threatened escalation if the issue wasn't resolved. Alex had felt a cold knot form in their stomach. This was different. This was official. They had responded with a carefully worded email, vaguely explaining their intensive personal fitness regimen and assuring the board they were doing everything possible to minimize disturbance. It was a half-truth, a desperate attempt to buy time without revealing the full, audacious scope of their ambition. They couldn't risk it, not yet. The Olympic trials were only months away, and every session, every lift, was critical. The second notice arrived a week later, less polite, more direct. It was a formal violation notice, accompanied by a fine of $250. The amount itself wasn't crippling, but the implications were. Continued noncompliance will result in escalating fines and potential legal action, including but not limited to property liens or forced cessation of activities. The words felt like a physical blow, a cold, bureaucratic fist tightening around Alex's throat. This wasn't just about noise anymore. It was about control, about the mundane rules of suburban living clashing head-on with an extraordinary, all-consuming dream. Alex stared at the paper, the numbers blurring slightly. $250 for training, for chasing a dream that had consumed their entire adult life. A wave of frustration, hot and bitter, washed over them. How could they explain? How could they make these people understand that the excessive noise wasn't a nuisance, but the very heartbeat of an Olympic hopeful? The secret, once a shield, now felt like a cage. The choice was stark: abandon the dream, or fight the very system that governed their home. And for Alex, abandoning the dream was not an option. Not now, not ever. The crisp, official notices kept coming, each one a fresh stab of anxiety, the fines escalating with a terrifying mathematical precision that mocked Alex's dwindling bank balance. First, it was $250, then $500, then a chilling $1,000, accompanied by threats of legal injunctions, property liens, and even the ultimate suburban nightmare: forced cessation of all disruptive activities or, worse, eviction proceedings. The paper, once a mere nuisance, now felt like a suffocating shroud, wrapping around Alex's life, squeezing the air out of their Olympic dream. Sleep became a luxury Alex couldn't afford, haunted by the phantom clang of weights and the imagined whispers of disapproving neighbors. Every dollar spent on groceries or utilities felt like a betrayal of the dream, a diversion of funds from the ever-growing pile of HOA penalties. The financial strain was immense, forcing Alex to take on extra, exhausting freelance work that further ate into precious training and recovery time, leaving them perpetually tired, their muscles aching with the fatigue that no amount of rest seemed to alleviate. The emotional toll was heavier still. A constant knot of dread in the stomach, the gnawing fear that everything they had worked for, every sacrifice, every drop of sweat, would be undone by a bureaucratic technicality. It was a battle fought not in the arena, but in the sterile, unforgiving landscape of homeowner association bylaws. The face of this relentless opposition soon materialized in the form of Mrs. Henderson, a woman whose perfectly manicured lawn seemed to extend into the very fabric of community governance. Her eyes, perpetually narrowed behind designer glasses, missed nothing. Alex would catch her peering over her pristine rose bushes, a smartphone subtly raised, recording the rhythmic thuds that escaped the garage. Her polite, almost sickly sweet smile, when they occasionally crossed paths, was always accompanied by a thinly veiled comment about community standards or the importance of neighborly peace. She was the self-appointed guardian of quiet enjoyment, and Alex's training was her personal crusade. It wasn't just the noise, Alex suspected. It was the unconventionality of it, the audacity of a private pursuit disrupting the carefully curated tranquility of their suburban enclave. Mrs. Henderson embodied the rigid, unyielding spirit of the HOA, a force that prioritized order above all else. Incapable of comprehending the extraordinary passion that drove Alex, desperate to find a resolution, had finally requested an audience with the HOA board, a formal meeting held in the community clubhouse, a room as bland and unforgiving as the rules it upheld. Mr. Peterson, the HOA president, a man whose every word seemed to be dictated by a rule book, sat at the head of the polished table, flanked by other equally stern-faced board members. Alex tried to explain, to articulate the sheer dedication, the Olympic aspirations, the necessity of the noise for their training. They spoke of the years of preparation, the physical demands, the dream of representing their country, but their words seemed to bounce off an invisible wall of indifference. Mr. or Ms. Alex, Mr. Peterson had intoned, his voice devoid of empathy, we appreciate your personal endeavors. However, our covenants are clear. Article 7, Section B, Subsection 3, explicitly prohibits noise disturbances exceeding 60 decibels between the hours of 7 p.m. and 7 a.m., and excessive percussive sounds at any time. We have received multiple, verified complaints. He held up a stack of printed emails, each one a digital accusation. The meeting was a sterile exercise in futility, a demonstration of bureaucracy's unyielding grip. They saw a rule breaker, not an athlete, a nuisance, not a dream. It was in the quiet despair after one such futile meeting, staring at another fine notice, that Alex's mind drifted back, a vivid, almost painful flashback to the moment the Olympic dream had truly taken root. It wasn't a sudden epiphany, but a slow, burning realization ignited by a grainy television broadcast years ago. Alex, a scrawny kid then, had been mesmerized by a weightlifter, a woman with a face etched in fierce concentration, hoisting an impossible amount of weight above her head, the crowd erupting as she secured the lift. It wasn't just the strength that captivated Alex, it was the raw, unadulterated willpower, the visible manifestation of years of unseen effort. That night, Alex had vowed, not just to be strong, but to be that strong, to feel that singular, electrifying moment of triumph. The path had been arduous, countless hours in dilapidated gyms, sacrificing social life for training, enduring injuries, pushing past mental barriers. There were times when doubt gnawed, when the sheer magnitude of the goal seemed insurmountable, but the image of that weightlifter, the roar of the crowd, the glint of the metal, it was a beacon, a silent promise to a younger self that had fueled every single thud and clang in that garage. This wasn't just a hobby, it was the very essence of who Alex was, the culmination of a lifelong obsession. Giving up now was akin to abandoning a part of their soul. Driven by this deep-seated motivation and the ever-present threat of the HOA, Alex embarked on a series of increasingly desperate and often comical attempts to mitigate the noise. They bought more rubber mats, layering them until the garage floor resembled a multi-tiered cake, but the impact still resonated. They experimented with thick moving blankets, hanging them from the ceiling, creating a bizarre, makeshift sound booth that did little more than trap the heat and make the air even more stifling. Online forums offered dubious advice: train with sandbags, impractical for Olympic lifts, dig a pit, impossible in a suburban garage. Alex even tried to soften the drops, attempting to control the descent of the barbell, but this compromised technique, risking injury and undermining the very purpose of explosive training. The loop of this struggle was relentless: a new attempt, a brief flicker of hope, followed by another complaint, another fine, another confirmation that the noise, the very sound of their dream, was an unyielding, immovable force in the quiet, rule-bound world of the HOA. Each failed attempt only amplified the feeling of being trapped, a powerful force constrained by invisible walls. Yet the dream, though threatened, refused to be silenced. The final straw arrived in the form of a formal letter. Not a fine this time, but a notice of mandatory on-site noise assessment and property inspection. The HOA, having exhausted their patience and their escalating fine schedule, was taking direct action. 2 days later, a pristine white HOA van, looking suspiciously like an unmarked police vehicle, pulled up to Jordan's driveway. Out stepped Mr. Peterson, the HOA president, his face a mask of bureaucratic resolve, accompanied by a stern-faced woman Jordan recognized as Ms. Jenkins. The HOA secretary, clutching a clipboard and a decibel meter, trailing behind them, almost like a shadow, was Mrs. Henderson, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of vindication and morbid curiosity. This wasn't just an inspection, it was an inquisition. Jordan felt a cold dread, but beneath it, a flicker of defiance. The secret, so carefully guarded, was about to be ripped open, but perhaps, just perhaps, that was exactly what needed to happen. The tension in the garage was palpable. The air, usually thick with the scent of sweat and iron, now felt charged with unspoken accusation. Mr. Peterson gestured vaguely at the rubber mats and the squat rack. "So, Jordan," he began, his voice clipped, "this is where the intensive personal fitness regimen takes place." His tone dripped with skepticism. Miss Jenkins, meanwhile, was meticulously setting up her decibel meter, her movements precise and clinical. Mrs. Henderson stood by the garage door, arms crossed, a smug smirk playing on her lips. Jordan took a deep breath, the scent of their own determination filling their lungs. There was no more hiding. "Yes, Mr. Peterson," Jordan said, their voice steady despite the tremor in their hands. "This is where I train." Ms. Jenkins nodded, then pressed a button on her device. "All right, Jordan. We need you to perform a typical sequence of your regimen. We need to measure the decibel levels." Jordan looked at the cold, unfeeling faces, then at the barbell, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. This wasn't just about noise anymore. It was about proving their worth, about laying bare the soul of their ambition. "All right," Jordan said, a new resolve hardening their voice. "But before I do, there's something you need to understand." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truth. Mr. Peterson raised an eyebrow. Impatient. "Understand what, precisely?" "Jordan, that your activities are disrupting the peace of our community." Jordan met his gaze, unflinching. "No, understand why. Understand that this isn't just excessive noise. This is the sound of an Olympic dream. My dream. I'm training for the Olympics." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the decibel meter. Ms. Jenkins froze, her finger hovering over the start button. Mr. Peterson's jaw went slack, his carefully composed expression shattering into one of utter disbelief. Mrs. Henderson's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of bewildered shock, her mouth slightly agape. It was as if Jordan had just announced they were building a rocket ship in their backyard. The sheer audacity of the claim seemed to short-circuit their bureaucratic minds. The Olympics," Mr. Peterson stammered, recovering slightly, his voice laced with incredulity. Are you serious?" Jordan didn't answer with words. Instead, they walked over to a locked cabinet, pulled out a key, and opened it. Inside, neatly organized, were the undeniable proofs of a life dedicated to a singular pursuit. Jordan pulled out a thick binder, its pages filled with official-looking documents. "This is my training log, meticulously recorded for the last 5 years, Jordan began, placing it on a nearby workbench. "These are my competition results from national championships, sanctioned by USA weightlifting." They laid out certificates, each bearing impressive numbers, personal bests that placed them among the nation's elite. "This," Jordan continued, pulling out a letter with a prestigious Sports Academy letterhead, "is a letter from my coach, a former Olympian herself, detailing my current training program and my projected readiness for the upcoming Olympic trials." Finally, Jordan pulled out a small, tarnished medal, not gold, but silver, from a significant national competition years prior. "And this," Jordan said, holding it up, "is a reminder of what's possible." The items lay there, stark evidence against the sterile backdrop of HOA rules. The reactions were immediate and varied. Ms. Jenkins, the HOA secretary, was the first to show a crack in her professional facade. She picked up the coach's letter, her eyes scanning the impressive credentials. A flicker of awe, almost admiration, crossed her face. This is legitimate," she murmured, more to herself than to the others. Mr. Peterson, however, remained rigid, though a bead of sweat now trickled down his temple. He picked up one of the competition results, his brow furrowed. But this doesn't change the noise violations, he insisted, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Rules are rules. Mrs. Henderson, surprisingly, was silent. Her eyes, usually so sharp with judgment, were wide, fixed on the metal. For the first time, Jordan saw not just a nosy neighbor, but a hint of something else, perhaps a grudging respect, or even a touch of wonder. The sheer scale of Jordan's ambition seemed to dwarf the petty grievances she had harbored. She looked from the metal to Jordan, then back to the HOA officials, a new, unreadable expression on her face. Jordan then stepped back towards the barbell. "Now," Jordan said, their voice resonating with newfound confidence, "you wanted to measure the noise. Watch this." They loaded the bar with a weight that made Ms. Jenkins gasp slightly. It was a heavy lift, a true test of strength. Jordan approached the bar, took a deep breath, and with a primal roar, executed a perfect clean and jerk. The weight flew overhead, held steady for a moment, then dropped, the crash echoing through the garage, louder, perhaps, than any previous drop, but now imbued with a different meaning. Ms. Jenkins' decibel meter spiked, but her eyes were not on the numbers. They were on Jordan, on the sheer power and grace of the movement. The silence that followed was different this time, not one of accusation, but of stunned contemplation. The noise was no longer just noise, it was the undeniable sound of an athlete pushing the boundaries of human capability. The HOA board members exchanged uneasy glances. The situation had just shifted dramatically. How do you find an Olympic hopeful for the sound of their dream? The rules, once so clear-cut, now seemed to bend under the weight of an extraordinary reality. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat, looking from Jordan to his colleagues, then to the silent Mrs. Henderson. We will need to convene an emergency board meeting, he finally stated, his voice unusually subdued. This requires further discussion. The decision was no longer simple, the path forward obscured by the unexpected revelation of a secret symphony. The revelation of Jordan's Olympic dream spread through the quiet suburban community like wildfire, not through official HOA channels, but through the irresistible currents of gossip, social media, and the sheer, unexpected drama of it all. Mrs. Henderson, surprisingly, was one of the first, albeit reluctantly, to spread the news. Her initial shock had morphed into a strange, almost proprietorial awe, and her usual complaints were replaced by hushed, incredulous whispers to her bridge club about that weightlifter, Jordan, you know, the one with the noise. Turns out they're going for the Olympics soon. The local online community forum, usually a battleground for debates about recycling schedules and lost pets, erupted with posts about our Olympic hopeful, photos of Jordan's national competition medals, likely leaked by a sympathetic HOA board member, Ms. Jenkins, perhaps, whose awe had clearly outweighed her adherence to protocol, circulated widely. The narrative shifted dramatically. The excessive noise was no longer a nuisance, but the very sound of aspiration, a powerful, resonant beat in the mundane rhythm of suburban life. Unexpected support began to materialize in heartwarming and, sometimes humorous ways. The elderly couple next door, Mr. and Mrs. Davies, who had initially been among the complainers, now brought over freshly baked cookies, leaving them on Jordan's doorstep with a note that read, "Keep making that beautiful noise, dear. We're rooting for you." A group of teenagers from down the street, who used to eye Jordan's garage with suspicion, now offered to help with soundproofing, which mostly involved them enthusiastically and somewhat ineffectually stapling old blankets to the garage walls, their youthful energy a welcome, if chaotic, presence. A local gym owner, having heard the story, offered Jordan free access to their professional sound-dampened lifting platform for a few hours each week, a gesture of solidarity that provided much-needed relief from the constant pressure of home training. Petitions circulated, not just online, but physically, door to door, urging the HOA to reconsider their stance and support their local hero. The community, once divided by noise, was now united by pride. This surge of public support did not go unnoticed by the HOA. Mr. Peterson found himself in an increasingly uncomfortable position. His inbox was flooded with emails, not just from Jordan's immediate neighbors, but from residents across the entire association, many of whom had never before engaged with HOA matters. The tone was overwhelmingly supportive of Jordan, with thinly veiled criticisms of the board's lack of vision and small-minded bureaucracy. Internal board meetings became heated. Ms. Jenkins, emboldened by the public sentiment and her own growing admiration for Jordan, openly challenged Mr. Peterson's rigid adherence to rules. Mr. Peterson, she argued, we have a chance to be part of something extraordinary here. Are we truly going to be the board that crushed an Olympic dream over decibel levels? Even Mrs. Henderson, though still prim, remained uncharacteristically silent during these debates, her earlier smugness replaced by a thoughtful, almost conflicted expression. The HOA, built on the bedrock of rules and regulations, was now facing the immense, unpredictable pressure of public opinion, forcing them to confront the human element of their cold, hard bylaws. Amidst this swirling vortex of community drama and bureaucratic pressure, Jordan's focus remained singularly, almost obsessively, on the Olympic qualifying trials. The date loomed large, a terrifying, exhilarating beacon. The stakes were higher than ever, not just for personal glory, but now for the vindication of their community's faith and the resolution of the HOA conflict. Training intensified to a brutal, almost unbearable degree. Early mornings began with grueling cardio, followed by hours in the garage, the barbell becoming an extension of Jordan's will. Every muscle screamed, every joint ached, but Jordan pushed through, fueled by an almost desperate determination. The weight on the bar felt heavier, not just physically, but emotionally, carrying the weight of expectations, the fines, the hopes of neighbors. Sleep was minimal, recovery a constant battle, and the mental grind was as punishing as the physical. Jordan visualized every lift, every successful snatch, every powerful clean and jerk, imagining the roar of the crowd, not just in the arena, but from their own quiet suburban street. Finally, the day arrived, the Olympic qualifying trials. The atmosphere was electric, a stark contrast to the quiet suburban garage. The air hummed with nervous energy, the scent of liniment and chalk thick in the air. Competitors, honed and ready, moved with a quiet intensity. Jordan stepped onto the platform, the lights blinding, the roar of the small, dedicated crowd a distant hum. This was it. Years of sacrifice, of excessive noise, culminated in this single moment. The first lift, a snatch, was clean, powerful, executed with precision. The second, a personal best, drew gasps from the audience. The final lift, a clean and jerk, was the one that mattered most, the one that would determine their fate. Jordan approached the bar, the weight immense, the silence in the arena almost deafening before the lift. With a primal scream that echoed the grunts in their garage, Jordan pulled, cleaned, and then, with an explosive drive, locked the weight overhead. It swayed precariously for a moment, a battle of wills between human and iron, before Jordan stabilized it, holding it steady for the required 2 seconds. The crowd erupted, a wave of sound washing over the platform. Jordan dropped the weight, the clang a triumphant symphony. Exhausted, exhilarated, Jordan walked off the platform, the outcome of the trials now in the hands of the judges, the scores being tallied. Back home, the HOA board was also meeting, their decision on Jordan's fines and future training still unresolved, hanging in the balance, just like Jordan's Olympic dream. The noise had reached its crescendo, and the world waited to hear its final note. The announcement came over the loudspeaker, a voice calm and authoritative, yet to Jordan, it felt like the very voice of destiny. and qualifying for the national Olympic team in the weight class, for example, 76 kilograms category. Jordan Hayes. A roar erupted from the crowd, a sound that vibrated through Jordan's very bones, 1,000 times more potent than any barbell drop. Tears, hot and unexpected, streamed down Jordan's face, blurring the faces of their coach, who was rushing forward, and the other athletes. Years of relentless training, of solitary struggle, of the excessive noise that had almost derailed everything, culminated in this single, glorious moment. It wasn't just a qualification. It was a validation, a thunderous affirmation that every sacrifice had been worth it. The dream, once a fragile whisper in a suburban garage, was now a deafening roar, echoing across the nation. Months later, the world watched. The Olympic Games. The opening ceremony was a kaleidoscope of color and sound, a sea of nations united by the spirit of competition. Jordan, marching with the USA delegation, felt a surge of pride so profound it almost brought them to their knees. This wasn't just for them, it was for every unsung athlete, every dream pursued against impossible odds, every neighbor who had rallied behind them. When it was time for their event, the roar of the Olympic arena was unlike anything Jordan had ever experienced. It was a living, breathing entity, a wave of sound that both intimidated and energized. Jordan stepped onto the platform, the weight of the nation, and a small, supportive suburban community on their shoulders. The bar felt heavy, but familiar. With a focus born of countless repetitions in their garage, Jordan executed the lifts. The snatch was strong, the clean and jerk even stronger. The final lift, a personal best, secured a medal, not gold, but a gleaming silver, reflecting the stadium lights, a testament to grit and unwavering spirit. The noise in the arena was deafening, a symphony of triumph, and for Jordan, it was the most beautiful sound in the world. Back home, the HOA's emergency board meeting was a far more subdued affair. Yet its outcome was equally significant. The public outcry, fueled by Jordan's undeniable success and the compelling narrative of their struggle, had been overwhelming. Mr. Peterson, looking noticeably more harried, cleared his throat. Given the extraordinary circumstances, he began, and the overwhelming sentiment of the community, the board has reached a decision regarding the fines levied against Mr. Almiz Hayes. Ms. Jenkins, a triumphant glint in her eye, spoke next. Effective immediately, all outstanding fines against Jordan Hayes, totaling insert total fine amount, for example, $5,000, are hereby waived. Furthermore, the HOA will amend Article 7, Section B, Subsection 3, to include a provision for Olympic-level athletic training, provided reasonable sound mitigation efforts are maintained and prior notification is given. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the small group of residents who had gathered. Even Mrs. Henderson, surprisingly, offered a small, almost imperceptible nod of approval. The HOA, once a bastion of rigid rules, had bent, not broken, under the weight of human endeavor. A few days after returning home, still basking in the glow of their Olympic achievement, Jordan received a knock on the door. It was Mr. Peterson and Mrs. Henderson, standing awkwardly on the porch. Mr. Peterson held a small, neatly wrapped gift. "Jordan," he said, a genuine smile replacing his usual stern expression, "on behalf of the HOA, we wanted to congratulate you. We truly had no idea. We're incredibly proud." Mrs. Henderson, surprisingly, stepped forward. "Jordan," she began, her voice softer than Jordan had ever heard it. I apologize for my part in this. I just I didn't understand. The noise was well, it was a lot. But now, when I hear it, I hear something different. I hear dedication. I hear a champion." She extended her hand, and Jordan, genuinely touched, shook it warmly. It was a moment of profound reconciliation, a bridge built between the mundane and the magnificent, between rules and dreams. The noise had ceased to be a point of contention and had become a shared symbol of pride. Jordan often found themselves back in the garage, the familiar scent of rubber and iron a comforting embrace. The silver medal, now polished and gleaming, hung proudly by the squat rack. The noise was still there, the thud-thud-thud of the barbell, the clang as it hit the floor, the grunt of exertion. But now, it wasn't just the sound of training. It was the sound of a dream realized, a testament to resilience, and a reminder of the unexpected harmony found in the most unlikely of places. The initial conflict with the HOA, the fines, the complaints, they had all been part of the journey, an unforeseen obstacle that ultimately strengthened Jordan's resolve and, perhaps, even brought a community closer. The irony was palpable. The very excessive noise that had threatened two-tier Jordan's life apart had, in the end, been the symphony that propelled them to Olympic glory and, in doing so, taught an entire neighborhood to listen more closely to the hidden dreams beating within its walls. The loop was complete. The noise had not been silenced, but understood, transformed from a nuisance into a celebration.